and then we'll just go through the crowd in that direction. Go ahead.
Sorry, Zoom controls are not my forte just yet. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Austin Kohout, for those that I haven't met just yet. I'm the financial specialist principal on the federal programs team, so allocations and CFSGA management, that sort of thing.
Stacie Rekow, Title I and monitoring.
Lisa English. I'm Title V-B, Equitable Services, pandemic relief funds, whatever else there is.
Michelle Perreira. I'm the program specialist for federal programs. I help out with monitoring and with the grant reimbursement application.
Hi, I'm Aaron Kennedy. Officially, I'm over data and reporting. Unofficially, I'm over anything involving Excel and data.
And that's the main team for today, but I think we have a couple of our other coordinators that are on here today, Emily and Carol. I think I saw you come through, and we'll have some of our other folks joining us off and on throughout our time together as we get going. So thanks for being here. And Aaron, I think you're next. Take it away.
All right, everyone. Since we're doing this on Zoom, just a few quick reminders. Please monitor your video and your audio as well, as you're probably having some fun conversations, but the rest of us probably don't want to hear all those. We do have options for you to ask questions, and you can drop those into the chat. And we have a few different options. Option one, at any point, you can use the chat feature in the Zoom towards the bottom of your screen, top, depending on how it's oriented. But you go ahead and click on chat and you can type in your question, and the rest of us on the team will be monitoring those and we'll answer them as we can. But as we go throughout the presentation, we'll have a few breaks where we'll stop and we'll try to get caught up on these questions for you. The other option is you'll see a button called React, and from there you can click Raise Hand. And when we get to that point where we'll stop for questions, that's where we'll allow you to unmute yourselves to ask your question, especially if it's a little bit more of a complex question. But when you do that, we'll allow you to unmute yourself so you can ask your question, and then we can get you the help that you need. And so, yeah, we'll do our best to help you out. And we'll go to the next slide. In the chat or through email, you get a copy of the CFSGA manual, and that includes all the updates for the year. It's a lot, 90 some odd pages. But at the back of that, you'll see our contact list with our pictures so you can tell what we look like. And there's also some notes there so that if you do want to print off the manual, you can include some notes right in the back of there. And again, that will be either emailed or you should be able to find that in the chat.
All right. Today, with all of our time together, we hope that we can achieve these things with you. One of them is to bring some awareness around what's happening at the federal and the state level, in particular around allocations as it relates to the grant application. We also want to make sure that we orient you to some new parts of the CFSGA, some of the sticky parts in the application that seem to cause you the most trouble. And this will be a little bit of a deviation from the past. We're not going to go through the whole thing today. We're really going to try to stick in the areas that seem to require the most depth of conversation. And then, of course, the new features, so you know what's changed since last year. So that's where we're headed today, broadly over the next couple of hours online. As we kick into it, I always like to make sure that we ground ourselves around why we do this work. And for me, in this space of federal programs, I really believe that we hold some keys to making sure our most at-risk kids get the support they need to be successful. And as you kind of run down the list of programs that you likely administer, you know that we're talking about our kids who come from poverty, or students experiencing homelessness, our migratory families, students that pop in and out of delinquent facilities, neglected facilities, students learning English for the first time, you name it, right? All of these programs exist because they serve some of our most fragile kids that need support. And when I think about the work that we do around our grant application, it's a good reminder that these really are some keys to some critical supports to help them to be successful. And as we kind of dig into the work today, this is a good grounding, a good reminder that every time we talk about allowability or we talk about information that's required in the application, it's really around making sure that we have supports in place because these kids need them. Oftentimes, the things that you're doing with these programs in your districts really are offering support that help them to be successful and change their lives. And so just a grounding in why we're here today from the balcony view. So as we kick into this first chunk, here's the outcomes for the first part of our time together. I'm going to go through some updates from USAID. Then we're going to dig right into the allocation for all these formula grants and the data that drives them, and then talk through the high-level timeline and the process for the grant application. So from USAID, the punchline is pretty straightforward. Money's coming. Programs still exist as they are today. A little more detail behind that. If you're not already aware, all of these grant programs are written into the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and these are laws that won't change unless Congress at our national level make changes to the laws themselves. And inside of ESEA, it really does all of these things you see here on the screen. It established the formulas for how we distribute the funding. It establishes the grants and the programs and the reasons, the purposes for the grants and the programs that you administer. All of that is written in law. And so none of that has changed to date. And so everything about these programs in the CFSGA are still established in law and still in place today. The other piece that's nice there is that Congress has also passed their continuing resolution, which is kind of their appropriations process for the funding. And at the national level, they appropriated funding flat from this year into next year. And so what you're going to see is that for Idaho, that it's not going to be flat because the rest of the distribution of that funding is based on our population of kids, poverty counts, counts of students in all of our programs. And so as we see fluctuations there, we're going to dig into that with you and show you that there are going to be some changes just because of the changes in our student demographics. But everything there is still in place. And that's a nice little bit of certainty in the midst of our work. These programs moving into next year are still in place, intact, and they haven't changed, as well as the funding structures. So that's a nice bit of solace in the midst of the noise coming out of the federal level. The other interesting thing, though, that's happening on the national scale and then also here in the state is that the U.S. Department of Ed has asked several times for states to submit waivers to the requirements under ESEA. And so we are still seeking feedback in this arena. It's probably not a topic we'll dig into today because that's not the purpose of today. But Superintendent Critchfield is interested in if there are requirements under ESEA that if we were to suspend those, if they could help you to serve kids better in some fashion and help support your work in a way, she's interested. And we're looking to compile those ideas and look to submit a waiver to USAID in the coming months. Just to give you an example of that, at the post-legislative tour recently, Superintendent Critchfield gave the example of waiving the third grade ISAT. So third graders would not have to take the ISAT in third grade, as well as the 11th grade ISAT. So those are just examples of some of the things that are floating around there in terms of conversations around waivers. So this is an interesting new proposal for us. So again, if you have something there and you think you've got an idea for us, I would encourage you just to email me and I can be that conduit to pass that on. But this is a new bit of flexibility that the state of Idaho is going to explore in the coming months. There's been a wave of other things that have come out of the federal level that have impacted us. And there's also been a lot of court orders and decisions that are kind of unraveling some things. And there's a lot of movement really fast. This one in particular, I want to talk about because this requirement came in the midst of our updates to our application, and it's going to stick for you guys next year. And so if you weren't aware, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is an assurance that you have signed every single year in the CFSGA. And so when you read through all the assurances that are listed there at the end of the application, this one was one that was already in place. You already certify every year and say, on behalf of the district, yes, we're following Title VI. What happened this year, though, is that we were asked to sign a letter to reassure that every one of you, every district, every LEA, every charter was following this portion of the law and really specifically targeting DEI programs specifically in that letter. And all of you are already doing this. It's not something new, but the signing of the letter was definitely a new requirement. What happened in the application for this year is that this was embedded as an ongoing requirement. So what you're going to see is in the files section at the end, there's going to be some new parts in here that we'll talk about, but one of those is the Title VI certification letter. And every one of your LEAs has already signed this and submitted it for the year we're in today. You will have to use that blue link, download the same letter. It's exactly the same, re-sign it, and then upload it in this section of the CFSGA for next year before you can submit your application. And so this one, we are aware that the courts made some decisions around this, but it got embedded in our process. Again, it's something you've certified every year, so it shouldn't cause trouble moving forward, but it is an additional step you're going to have to take as you submit your application this year. So that's a piece here for you to be aware of. Before we roll into that, I guess I should pause and make sure we have a chance to answer any questions that you might have relating federal activity or things that have shifted on the federal level. And give me a second to double check. There's nothing in the chat. I'll pause for just a moment. If you want to raise your hand, if you have any questions regarding any of those pieces, I want to make sure we can answer that for you today. All right, I think we're gonna roll right on. Don't forget to use that chat feature, though. We can definitely circle back to any of these things as we move along.
All righty. So get a little bit of the legalese out of the way before we get too carried away with what allocations are. So off the bat, just an overview of what these allocations actually are. This is your reminder that these are a grant that you're applying for. The grant that you're applying for, this is not just a embedded form of your annual funding, meaning that there are imposed extra restrictions on the funding that you are receiving. If you're going to take funding, you are required to be monitored. You're required to be maintaining Title IX and Title VI requirements, that sort of thing. Nothing crazy. One of the best ways I've heard it described is that these funds are a tool in your toolbox to innovate in order to best meet the needs of your students wherever they may lie, as long as they're along the goal lines of what each grant is targeted towards. So when you're signing the affirmation at the end of your application, that is you asserting that you understand that, yep, our district is going to have to bear the weight of some additional restrictions in order to better meet student needs that weren't otherwise possible to have been met in the ordinary scope of our school district funding. So moving forward from that, the CFSGA itself contains all of these formula grants. These are the grants within the CFSGA itself, what the scope is. You may have some other grants from our department, like the EL Enhancement Grant, McKinney-Vento Grant, that sort of thing. Those are not hosted within the CFSGA itself, but all the rest of these are all under kind of a similar category for you. The sections of the CFSGA are that you are going to provide your assurances that you do meet the programmatic and fiscal requirements of each section. Each one has some requirements, and you're going to make some attestations that, yes, you understand, and yes, that you have policy in place to support the requirement. You're going to perform a fiscal self-assessment to attest that your budgeting and financial structure of the district is ready or can be prepared to support the fiscal requirements of each of these grants. You're going to have to provide a balanced budget as a part of your application. You're going to record your program goals and activities, and you're also going to record your required consultation with private schools, tribal agencies, that sort of thing. This application by itself should be able to stand alone as a record of what activities you are pursuing as a district, what your goals were, what your methods were, what you actually intend to purchase, that sort of thing. It shouldn't require some kind of narrative outside of just outside of itself in order to provide justification or context, that sort of thing. It should generally cover itself. And then finally, once you've completed all the above sections, naturally, you're going to sign off on it and mark it as having been completed. So in the grand scheme of things with these programs in this application, the State Department of Ed here in Idaho basically serves as a pass-through agency from the federal level to the school districts. The federal level awards the funding, the school districts perform the services and perform the program goals itself. We are effectively an intermediary performing on-the-ground support for you to meet the requirements of the grant programs. So above all else, we are here to support you. If we're sending back a CFSGA or sending back a GRA request or asking for some extra clarification on documentation, it is through the lens of we're here to support you to meet the goals of the grant so that you're protected and you're serving the kids the best way you can within the scope of the grant requirements. So when you get kind of messy feedback or you're having trouble on that end, remember that the spot we're coming from is a place of support. Ultimately, we're not here to create barriers that don't need to exist. We're here to help out wherever we possibly can, including accommodating district needs. Now, get to the fun, exciting part. As of today, May 21st, we have not received any preliminary allocations for any program besides Title 1A. We have gotten Title 1A preliminaries, and we are getting ready to load those into the CFSGA here this week with a couple small tweaks. But what we have seen in Title 1A is that the overall allocation for the state has dropped by about 4%. Now, that reflects the fact that the overall census population for the state of Idaho has dropped relative to other states, and even against itself, it has declined. Title 1A allocations are based on what are described as a formula count, which is effectively a catch-all term for students in poverty or families in poverty, that sort of thing. And in general, the state of Idaho is less in poverty than it was the last time they pulled this data for us. So with a wealthier state, relatively speaking, and level overall funding at the federal level, we've seen a decrease. I think we saw a decrease statewide of about 3,000 formula units from about 40,000 last year down to about 37 this year. So the allocations as they sit in the CFSGA right now are informed stand-ins. Like I said, I will be uploading an update here in the next few days. Generally speaking, what I've seen when comparing the placeholder allocations to what I've got prep for preliminary is that the majority of districts either saw a very, very slight increase or a slight decrease, with a good chunk of districts having seen I wouldn't call them a large decrease, but a middling decrease, something that's going to be felt, unfortunately, but not something that's catastrophic. at least for the most part. Some districts had some more variance to others. And the in-district variations relative to one year to the next can be dictated by the creation of a new charter or students now enrolling in a new charter, your district becoming more wealthy according to the Census Bureau, that sort of thing. The actual free and reduced counts that you're submitting with your lunch data and your IC data doesn't actually directly drive the information that dictates your allocation directly. So even if you're in your district, you have seen an increase in low income count or increase in low income percentage in your district overall, that may not necessarily correlate with an increase in allocations. Unfortunately, it's a disconnect that I have to live with and we have to live with. So when we're talking about allocations, like I said, the only one I have right now is Title 1A. But since the core data for Title 1A is census data and just the student and foster care count, we can kind of extrapolate what the data is going to do for Title 2A, Title 4A, Title 5B, that sort of thing. And generally speaking, since we have seen a decrease in most districts, I would expect a similar change in your Title 2 and Title 4 allocations as a district if you receive more than the minimum for Title 4, of course. But so if you see your allocation dropping from last year to this year's preliminary, once I get it uploaded this week, I would expect a similar change in your Title 2 allocation as well. Now, for the other programs like Title II, Title III, 1C, that sort of thing, we haven't actually gotten final allocation numbers just yet, but the numbers that are in the CFSGA right now for those programs are informed based on changing data that I have access to already. That's your district enrollment, that's your English learner assessments, that's your migratory status counts, that sort of thing, and I have that data already to hand. So if the allocation from last year to this year is truly steady for those programs, you will see basically your placeholders become your actual preliminary allocations. But that also assumes that the actual allocation to our state remains steady from last year, which we've already seen isn't exactly always the case. Okay, so all of the grants that are in the CFSGA right now are 27-month performance period grants, meaning that when I award you grant funding on July 1, or when we award you grant funding on July 1, those funds are spendable until September 30 of 2027. Now, all of those grant programs have a carryover limitation, meaning that after the first 15 months, you have a cap of how much funding you can have remaining after that point. For Title 1A, that's a 15% cap, or your carryover limit effectively, meaning that for Title 1A, you need to have spent 85% of your Title 1A allocation before September 30 of 2026. After that point, you can spend down that remaining 15%. This year, it's more important than usual to spend money on the current year population. Naturally, I mean, it's always important to match up current year funding with current year students. But this year in particular, we have seen behavior at the federal level that would suggest they're relatively unwilling to provide excess carryover waivers this year. Ordinarily, a school district has a carryover waiver that they can use once every 3 years within Title I. And a lot of districts use those in the COVID surrounding years, mostly because of ESSER dollars. So if you used your 1 every 3 year state level exception, and then you had to use a federal level exception again in the years following, that federal level exception isn't going to be available for at least the foreseeable future. So if you're on that 3 year cooldown, it's essential you meet that that carryover limit for right now. For Title 2A, I see in the chat asking if it applies to 2A. For 2A, memory serves, it's 25%. Don't quote me on that, but that figure will be shown in your CFSGA. Most other federal programs besides Title 1A don't have a statutory requirement. The other ones have a lot more state discretion in them. So 2A may be more flexible on carryover. Offhand, we'll have to approach that again after this webinar. So when we are discussing the CFSGA timeline for the year overall, we're going to break it into 6 chunks for you. Your pre-award phase, your planning and consultation phase, when the application actually begins to be open and rubber hits the road for budget planning. June 30 is a key milestone every single year. That's when your application is due. Your application review period and approval phase, and then your post-award revision phase, and then program implementation phase. So we're going to rock through each of those and see what kind of details live under each of those categories. So in the November to May period, this is the part of the year that would be best spent gathering input from your district stakeholders. This is when you're gathering data and collecting feedback from your school district, from your superintendent, from your business manager, from your program director, your teachers, your staff, getting input on what the district goals are, what the needs are, that sort of thing. You're also going to chat with your private school leaders and your tribal members and community stakeholders, that sort of thing, to get an idea of what the community is really striving for and what their needs are. The key motif is to build a needs assessment for what your students would best be served to achieve. Then, once you've got an idea of what goals there are and you've got some idea of your priority level, what needs to be done first, what can be done second, what's a nice to have instead of a need to have, you can then begin plugging in theoretical numbers for what could be your budget for the upcoming year. We're doing this in the November to May period. We haven't even seen a federal allocation just yet. The federal budget may not have been passed just yet. So we're working with forecasting. My rule of thumb when I was working in the district is to generally take 3 kind of soft forecasts. One based on my hold harmless amount for Title I, for example. Basically, in Title I, I, by statute, cannot receive less than 15% of my previous year's allocation. Some cases that can be even more generous. It can only be 5 or 10%, but generally speaking, 15% is the maximum an allocation can be declined. So I can use that number and say, okay, well, what's my bare bones, what's my skeleton program look like? If I get this little funding, what can I still do? What programs can I build? What needs can I still meet? I have a second budget where it's like, okay, if it holds generally steady, what do I get to continue to do? With costs increasing, can I still pull off the same program, or do I have to do a little bit of a decline? Or after that, I can do a wish list. Okay, if funding increases by 5 to 10%, what extra stuff or what fun stuff do I get to do with it to meet needs that I couldn't previously approach? So I've got these kind of 3 soft plans just to guide what my budget's going to be once I actually know firm numbers. And you can have an idea of what those investments might look like or what those cuts might look like before you actually see those numbers. Am I going to make staffing changes? Am I going to invest in training? If I'm looking out into the future and I see that my funding is going to fall off a cliff here in about a year or two, it might be not a bad idea to say, okay, I'm going to get the same money this year, but I'm going to pivot my spending to more heavily prioritize training and infrastructure to be able to support those kids after the funding goes away. So I've done these scenario planning, then the application opens, and I've got a boost a firm idea on what my allocation is for the year, depending on how much the federal level cooperates with us and getting you an allocation amount. That's when you're going to meet what the funding level you actually received is with one of those scenarios you've already built out, make some adjustments, make some tweaks, and then fill out the application using that plan. Now, it's essential at this point that you get your application submitted before June 30 or on June 30. If the application comes through after June 30, no expenditures can be allowable between the date of July 1 and your submission date. If you submit the application on July 15th, even if we get into August of next year and you submit an expense report or an invoice or some project that you've done between July 1 and July 15, it's still unallowable. It's essential that you get that application submitted on or before June 30. And now, bear in mind, we still have the opportunity to send the application back. It doesn't have to be fully approved, just submitted. If it's getting to be crunch time and it's like June 15 and you're still feeling kind of shaky and you need some help, just get the application together to the point where you can submit it. Just prioritize clearing validation errors. We can get you over the line after the fact, but without too much of a penalty. But if you don't get it submitted at all, there's actual consequences. So by all means, get something over the line, even if you need our help. It's much, much easier to work with. Okay, so once you've gotten the application submitted, that's when the application review and approval process begins. We at the State Department begin reviewing applications. If there's anything that needs some extra action, needs some support from you to get it over the line, we'll send it back to you with some notes saying, hey, there's some adjustments to be made. In terms of mindset, we are operating under the assumption that we want to get you funding as soon as possible. It's our priority to support you through this process. I mean, this is kind of our go time for the year. So we're here to help you. We're here to get you over that line, and we're here to get you that money. Obviously, you may not be in the office in the middle of July, so you're not able to necessarily make it your priority, but on our end, we're fighting to get you over that line as soon as we can. Our goal is to get everybody's application approved and money out to you in a compliant way. So that you'll probably see some tenacity from our team to get that to you as best we can. Once your application has finally been fully approved, you will then see your GRA populated with your preliminary allocation once it's been fully approved across the board. You won't see money in the GRA before then, but you'll probably have some carryover to spend before then. So, okay, so totally normal expected part of the year. We've spent all this time building out a nice, beautiful budget, and inevitably all plans fail upon the best laid plans fail on first contact. So the year starts, something inevitably goes sideways, and we need to change directions. We need to pivot. We were planning on filling 15 positions, and we only filled 7. We have some extra money lying around. What are we going to do with it? So there's an unsubmit request and a budget revision process within the CFSGA itself. So at the moment things go sideways, you have the opportunity to revise your application and to get pre-approval for whatever you're going to try and do next. So I've got some listed items on the slide that describe why you might want to revise your application. The most important one in my mind is the 5th one I've highlighted. It's a bit more layman's terms. Inevitably, it just means something has to change. Now, on our end, it's important that you revise the application before you actually spend along a new plan, because we would like at the State Department to be able to promise to you that what you're about to do is allowable. If you go out and do something and spend money on a project with the assumption or the hope that it's going to be allowable in your application, and then you go to submit it for the GRA to get reimbursement for it, we can't provide any sort of assurance that that's going to be okay. And we may end up in a situation where you're out that cash. That's not something that we can all afford to do. We can't just front the cash for a program and hope it's going to be okay. So the safe route and by far the way, the recommended route is to unsubmit your application and revise it to support what the new program is, and then get approval from us before you get carried away spending money for that program. We want to keep you safe, and we want to be able to, give our assurance that you're going to be okay before you get too carried away. Not to say there won't be emergencies, but, best practices, highly recommended, all the importance I can bestow without requiring it. Okay. When you are making an application revision, you're going to add 3 bits of information into your unsubmit request. You're just going to tell us briefly what changes you're planning on making, why the change had to happen, and how the changes meet the purpose of the grant. This is a slide that was in last year's presentation as well, but this year we've pivoted and have some structure around these 3 questions. I don't need a book. I don't need an essay. I just need something on the record that lives within your CFSGA forever that speaks to what this budget revision or application revision was tied to. Because this isn't just a, hey, here's what I think I'm going to spend the money on, and then I can do whatever I want after the fact. This is still a grant application. Remember that first slide I showed you? This is like a condition of receiving funding is that you're receiving prior approval of the expenditures before you actually go out and spend it. If you're going to change that plan, you have to have a real, actual reason. And we're not even just having fun and creating restrictions out of nowhere. We're, following statute. This is a part of the ESEA grant and the SEA law that we have to have an award revision structure. So all I need from you when you're going to go revise your application is a brief yet, that's a good word for it, a thorough and fair representation of what you're going to be changing. It could be 5 words if it covers it effectively. If it's, I lost paras and need to buy more supplies, and I couldn't hire those paras, and these supplies are going to build out infrastructure for the district after those paras are gone, that's fine. That's everything I need. In the event that your GRA is sent back to you with the reason of, hey, my application didn't have this information in it, I need to add to my application. That's a good bit of information to put in line number 2. Doesn't have to be complicated, it just needs to be something. As I kind of alluded to the unsubmit requests live in that application forever. So when I'm 50 years old or 50 years older and I'm senile trying to look back on why applications were unsubmitted, I may not remember a phone conversation, but I can at least review what the unsubmit request had in it to get an idea of what was going on. And in a more real sense, when our coordinators are reviewing an application that has been unsubmitted previously, this information guides them of where to look and what may have been changed so that they can quickly and more effectively, get your application back to you. Okay, so once we've gotten through all of that and we have an approved application, we're ready to rock, we're ready to party. We can then we've hopefully already been providing services to students. This is the part of the year where I'm actually going to be I actually have programs in buildings. I've got paras in buildings. I've got trainings going on, and I'm organically collecting documentation to support the program that I've built and that I'm executing. I'm collecting invoices. I'm collecting time and effort. I'm collecting meeting notes. I'm collecting agendas, sign-in sheets, parent engagement sheets, that sort of thing. Inventory, performance indicators, everything across the board. And this is to meet the monitoring requirements. Monitoring is only a panic-inducing event if you're not organically collecting documentation throughout the year. Spread the load out, have it organically be generated as the services are performed, and it'll lower your stress levels hilariously when it becomes time to be monitored by us. Additionally, ideally, and Michelle will touch on this later, but collecting routine reimbursements for all your grants will keep you up to date on this as well. It'll keep you on the pulse of what's going on in your programs. And you can keep an eye on what your spending patterns may be if they're drifting in unallowable territory earlier than you would if you only drew down funding at the end of the year. Alrighty, any questions there? Wonderful. Oh, Brittany's got one, looks like. Brittany, you want to unmute? For time and effort template,
Sorry.
there is. Oh,
I missed that memo that I was allowed to unmute.
Oh, yep.
Just to expedite, I have experience with collecting time and effort examples, but most of my experience is with like digital submissions where it isn't something I'm self-creating. So I was just wondering if this is similar in that sense, or if there's something that we're creating at the school level manually and then submitting.
For now, and somebody else on the team could by all means correct me, but for now, it is a structure of we're going to tell you what the requirements are, and we've told you what the requirements are, and we're hoping that the district is able to generate something on their end that meets those requirements.
Okay.
There is an intent in the future to generate templates or to get a better idea of what structure look like in districts to build guidance on that front so that you do have a nice ready to go template on your end. But for now, that's not how the structure is built.
Okay,
So
understood.
okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Cool. Well, we kind of moved through that. Do we want a 5-minute break or are we good to keep going?
Yeah, let's pause for 5 minutes and then we'll circle right back. So 1:44 exactly on the clock. There we go. Perfect. Okay, we'll see you guys in a few minutes. Get up, stretch, move around.
All right, well, welcome back. We are going to move into the next portion of the CFSGA Workshop webinar. And the next portion will be where we cover hot topics. All right, so the hot topics, what we're doing is we're shifting how we're doing the workshop this year. And we're splitting it into hot topics where we cover things that we can provide more assistance on. And then we have updates and changes and new things to the CFSGA will be our next section. And then after that, we'll provide some guided instruction on selected topics. So we'll just go right into hot topics. We're going to cover budget narrative descriptions first. Then we'll cover how the CFSGA and the GRA work together. And last, in the hot topics section, we'll talk about transferability, Title V-A transferability, and how it works in the application. All right, so budget narratives and GRA implications. So first off, budget narratives can be found in the CFSGA, and they are in every grant section of the CFSGA. So for example, let's say this is Title I-A, this would be in your budget tab. And in the budget narrative is where you fill out your allocation for each category and you put in a description of how you are planning to use the grant funds. And so what is the GRA? The GRA is the grant reimbursement application that the State Department of Education uses to reimburse federal funding back to you. And it's used across the entire department. So 21st Century uses it, Child Nutrition uses it, special education and federal programs use it as well. So how does what is in the CFSGA affect GRA reimbursement requests? So for every GRA drawdown that's submitted, it's compared with the submitted grant budget that's listed in the CFSGA. So for example, if a Title I-A GRA request is submitted, it's compared against what is in the budget in the Title I-A section of the CFSGA. If something isn't included in the grant budget or even in the program descriptions, if the grant has that section in the CFSGA, then the GRA request may be returned until the budget is modified to include it. And then the IDE coordinator or the SCE coordinator has a chance to approve it. So one thing that we always consider when using these funds is that these are grant funds. All expenditures of these grant funds have to meet the purpose of the grant. And so we can find the purpose of the grant as it is directly pulled from ESEA. We can find it at the landing page for each title program in the CFSGA. So for example, what we have is the Title I-A landing page, if you will, of the CFSGA. And the purpose of Title I-A is to provide subgrants to LEAs to provide all children significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. This purpose can be found on every single page or every single grant page of the CFSGA. And we always consider if the expense meets the purpose of the grant. This is how the funds are meant to be used. This is why you were awarded those funds, is to implement the programs according to the purpose of the grant. If a GRA request is submitted that doesn't directly support the purpose, sometimes it's returned and clarification is asked, like the question might be, how does this support Title I-A? How does this support homeless students? How does this support migrant education students? And it's only because what we're looking for here is a connection because we're not able to find it in the notes of the drawdown request or in the documentation how it supports that program. So why is it so important to have everything, or to the best of your knowledge, in the CFSGA? So number one, as a condition of receiving these funds, you need to submit an application for them. And in the application, you need to have a budget narrative that describes how you're going to use these funds to support the grant programs. So that's number one. Number two is if you submit your application and you need to modify it, there are certain conditions that have to be met if it's, over a certain threshold of change from what you submitted. So for example, 10% difference. Or if it wasn't previously included in your application, you need to revise it to include it. And so that the first code that we have up here is from the Code of Federal Regulations, and that specifically, the first one says you need to revise your budget and your program plans to reflect how you're actually using these funds. The second one is some expenses or expenditures require prior approval before you can spend the funds. Prior approval means that you've reached out to the SDE, either through the CFSGA itself by putting it in the budget and submitting it for review, or by email to an SDE coordinator explaining how you want to use these funds to get written approval. And if you happen to go the route of emailing or talking to an SDE coordinator, the end result is still that the CFSGA budget would need to be revised to include how the funds are now being used. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to walk through some examples. I'm a visual learner, and hopefully this will help clarify some things, but if not, feel free to put questions in the chat. We're happy to help answer those. So for our first example, this one is a GRA request. It is submitted under the Title 1C Migrant Education Program. This particular LEA was requesting reimbursement for indirect costs for this school year. So when this request was compared against the Title 1C budget narrative in the CFSGA, this LEA had actually requested an indirect cost rate from public school finance, but they had not put in an allocation for indirect costs in the CFSGA itself. So the LEA was asked to revise their budget and put in an allocation for indirect costs. And why this is important is that because they had to add money into this category, they're taking money out of different categories in order to fill out the whole budget. So number one, if you want to do indirect cost rates, be sure to fill out this section. For our second example, this is a GRA request that was submitted under Title 1A. This LEA submitted a request for supplies and material in the supplies and materials category, and it happened to be for school-wide curriculum, and they were a school-wide LEA. So this request was for $35,000 in change for this curriculum. When it was compared with the Title 1A CFSGA, the LEA had only allocated $8,000 in change in their supplies and materials category. I also checked the purchase services category because it could be considered either or, and there was nothing allocated there. So this LEA, number one, they needed to revise their CFSGA to include that curriculum, especially because it was for $35,000, which is a significant change, which according to that CFR code means that you have to revise your budget in order to use those funds. Number two, because of the amount of this curriculum, this actually needed prior approval from the department and could be considered a capital object because of the cost amount. So there would have had to have been additional steps that needed to happen in order for this to be approved for payment. So it's important that if you are considering curriculum for next year, a supplemental curriculum, or a bigger expense, to put it in here now so that we can help you through the steps before you've already spent the money. So here's an example of what should this look like. What should supplies and materials, for example, look like? So we know that at this time, you don't know exactly how you're going to spend your funds next year. But we are asking you to do your best estimate at this time. So for example, this LEA has educational subscriptions. They knew that they were going to renew Imagine Learning, A to Z Reading, Spanish iStation, etc. So they put those in here. They didn't have to put like specific amounts for those subscriptions, but they knew next year our plan is to renew those subscriptions or to start those subscriptions. And they also have a section for resources for multilingual learners. And in this one, they have like supplemental materials for newcomers, dual language resources. So this is a way of being specific, but not super specific. And this is approvable as it is if a GRA request was submitted that included something like resources for multilingual learners. And it was relatively close to what is listed here, it would be approved. Another example is they have like supplies and materials for implementing positive behavioral interventions and supports. So this would also be approvable as it is. You don't have to put 20 kits of this PBIS program or 50 textbooks or 25 headphones, because at this point you're not going to know that and plans change. But this is a way of outlining what you're planning to do in a general but specific way, if that makes sense. So one other topic that I do want to touch on in this particular section, it does have educational field trips listed here. And what would be preferred is to have more of a map maybe of what those educational field trips look like for the next year. So let's say this year that we're in right now, the fifth graders went to the Shoshone ice caves or something like that. And you were like, that was really fun. Maybe we should do that next year. It was very educational. This is where you could put that here. If you don't quite know what you are going to do for field trips, just put your best guess. I will say though, if it is something like going to Lagoon or Roaring Springs or Silverwood or anything like that, the best bet would be to put this in here now so that the coordinator can work with you to determine if it's even allowable for the program, and to make sure that it meets whatever curriculum or standards that are needed in order for it to be allowable. Okay, so our next section that we're going to take a look at is staffing and what should this look like in the CFSGA. So previously, what we have asked for in the description section of the CFSGA is to have a breakdown of all of the positions by FTE count. And so this can be quite burdensome. Plus, we're already collecting that information in the FTE spreadsheet. So Austin will touch on this a little bit later from now and go into more depth. But for this section, in the description field, what we are asking you to do is to just put the positions that are being paid with these funds. So for an example, if you have 2 paraprofessionals, you don't have to, and you know that one of them's part-time, you don't have to put part-time here. You can just put 2 paraprofessionals. And the top example is what it might look like for a smaller LEA to fill this out. This also includes like stipends. And then the bottom example is for a larger LEA, what it might look like. And in this section, you don't have to put 25 paras at X school, 16 paras at this other school. You're going to put that information into the FTE spreadsheet or the position supplement spreadsheet. But we'll collect that information there. But what we're asking for is just general information in this field. For our fourth example, these are examples that are pulled from the CFSGA, and these are specific to equitable services. So equitable services for private schools is always a little trickier just because of the nature of the program. However, in the description field, we will need more information about what is being provided to the private schools. So I have 2 examples on the page. The first one is in the description field. It says 1 student at X school. And that is information that we get in other places in the CFSGA. So what we would need here is what services are being provided to that student. In the second example that we have down below, it's equitable services amount identified for private schools based on total enrollment in schools within the district. Again, we collect this information in other parts of the CFSGA. So we would need, in this section, we would need to know what that looks like. So here is an example of what could it look like or what should it look like. This particular LEA supports 3 different or provides services to 3 different private schools. So what they did is they split it between the different private schools in the description field. So for the first private school, they identified that they were going to help with a Title 1A teacher salary and benefits. For the second one, private school, it was for staff salary and benefits provided through a second LEA that was the fiscal agent. And then the third private school, they put technology and professional development and training for staff. So when a GRA request comes through, if this information is in front of us, it's easier to approve those things under equitable services. If a GRA request comes through and your CFSGA looks more like our first examples, then we need to determine if it's even allowable what is being submitted first. So I'll pause here. Any questions for anybody? And I will say with this view, I can't see the chat, so I would love some help if there are some questions.
Yeah, nothing at the moment.
Hi, this is Brittany again. I just have a quick question about if there's a revision that's necessary in the grant. Is there any sort of additional like non-negotiables in terms of the obligation date? Like if I put a submission through for a revision today and I needed to increase the amount in a line item, am I allowed to spend or use that money from an expenditure earlier in the school year, or does the expenditure have to happen from today or after today?
Okay, so I'll take my best effort at this, and anyone can jump in and help. So if you're revising your CFSGA and it's to include an expenditure that you've already spent money on, is that right?
I guess I'm just seeing if that's an option.
It is an option, and it would be very important to revise the CFSGA just so that there's an opportunity for the SDE coordinator for that grant program to approve it.
Mhm.
It's preferred that you do that before you spend the money. However, even if you've spent it and it turns out and it is allowable, feel free to revise the CFSGA and that way we can compare it with the GRA when it's submitted.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, it's just kind of like, it seems like it's like on a case by case basis and we should just keep the conversation fluid.
Please do. Yes. I'll
Okay.
add to that, Brittany, though, that the way that you guys get spending authority every year is by first submitting the application on June 30th. And so because these are formula grants that occur every year, submission of your application on time is what gives you like legal authority to begin obligating dollars towards these programs. And so that's really the first and major trigger. And so like Austin said earlier, you know, if you were to submit your initial application later in the year, you could miss out on the ability to get reimbursement during that time period where you didn't submit it. So the initial submission of your application is like the legal, now you have spending authority. All of the revisions afterwards you can do, and you can, if you obligated dollars in the past and you change your application, that's fine. The only caution I'd put there is it doesn't necessarily guarantee that everything's allowable, right? So the open communication you just said, please
Mhm.
absolutely be in touch with us as you make changes, because we can help steer you in the right direction or make sure things are gonna ultimately get reimbursed on the back end. But the legal check is that submission initially on June 30th.
Okay, yeah, this was more or less a question of like an unforeseen staffing change or something like that. Or if we needed to, spend maybe 50,000 on curriculum instead of 20 or something like that. But
Yep, all allowable. Yep.
okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, any other questions?
I don't see anything else in chat, so
Okay,
go ahead.
all right. Okay, so we're going to move into the CFSGA and GRA connection from a grants management point of view. So you are considered a grants manager, no matter what your role is. If you are implementing the program, if you were working with the funding, if you are providing input on it, you are considered part of the grants management, process. So we do have some best practices for successful grant management that we would like to share with you. So the first one is to promote frequent communications between the business manager and the federal programs administrator. This is important so that everyone is on the same page and everyone is aware of how the funds are being spent or how they're being obligated for future use. So we all have felt like these people in these pictures at one point or another. So promoting that frequent communication and checking in with each other is a really great way to stay connected. So a second best practice would be to schedule monthly meetings to review the budget, the submitted budget and the actual, like how the funds are actually being used. And at this point, by doing monthly meetings or at least quarterly meetings, you're staying aware and on top of how the funds are being used. And at that point, you can review if you need to revise the application, the CFSGA application. So a third best practice is to assure that GRA requests align with the approved CFSGA program or budget. And one way to do that is with those check-ins and with the making sure it meets the actual budget that is listed in the CFSGA. If it's not in the CFSGA, there is a possibility that the GRA request will be returned until the CFSGA is revised to reflect how the funds are actually being spent. And the GRA request won't be approved for payment until the CFSGA is revised and resubmitted for approval. So another best practice is to do GRA requests monthly or quarterly. If you tend to do them once a year or every 6 months, you do have a higher risk of errors. You may run into delayed issue detection. And then there is the possibility of return funds, which could lead to cash flow issues. So an example would be if you submit a drawdown once a year at the end of the year, and what you have submitted doesn't align with what's in your CFSGA, your whole GRA request might be returned. And so that holds up the payment of that whole chunk of money. And that is something that we absolutely don't want to do, especially if it's for something that's some little thing that may not be that may be unallowable. So you can choose your own adventure for grants management. You can scale the cliff without a harness and hope we're not falling, or we can do a walk on the beach, hand in hand, looking for seashells. But always know that we're here to support you. And if you have questions about what could be allowable or not, feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to help answer those questions and to help walk you through this. So one more thing, and we're pretty excited about this. The federal programs team and the special education team have been working together to create a documentation manual for not the CFSGA, for the GRA. We are planning for an early fall release, and we'll be providing more training on that when it is released. One part that we would like to do is to create some little mini manuals, if you will, of reports that can be pulled from different accounting softwares across the state. Because there is not one uniform software across all the LEAs, we would like to focus on a few that majority use and help create support for what types of reports you can pull from that software that meet the requirements for documentation. So if you happen to be like a super user, or you just want to share your time and expertise, please reach out to Austin, and he'll be happy to get that information from you. We would love to get some input on what reports would be helpful for everyone. All right, any questions? Okay, next up is transferability.
Well, that is me. So welcome everybody. Glad you're here. This may or may not apply to your LEA. And if you want more information, the CFSGA, the updated manual that we mentioned, that is also dropped in the chat. This information starts on page 91 and goes through 99. So transferability, for 5A transferability, is a flexibility tool to allow you to move funds from, you can see there on the screen, you can remove funding from your 2A allocation or your 4A allocation, and you can transfer it to any of those programs listed there on the bottom. Once those funds are transferred, they become the new program that you've transferred it to. For instance, if you transferred your 4A funding into 1A, now you spend those former 4A funds as 1A funds. So there are only specific programs that you can do this with, but it does provide a whole range of flexibility that you might not have been able to have without transferability. So let's see, we're having trouble moving forward. Okay, so a few things to mention. Michelle was talking about the GRA a few moments ago. The CFSGA and the GRA do not talk to each other. So it creates a little bit of difficulty in managing transferability. What you need to do, there are some steps there. So here's my example, a way to help you visualize this. I get my application and all my fundings. It comes in this big bucket. But within the bucket, I have a jar of red marbles that are my 1A dollars. And I have a jar of blue marbles that are my 4A dollars. But I'm using transferability, so I pour those blue marbles into the red marbles in the 1A jar. They're all red marbles now, but the GRA still thinks I have blue marbles. So when you go to draw down, there are a couple things you need to do. You create the drawdown request in the original grant. So in this case, it would be the 4A dollars, right? You have to make certain that you have sufficient accounting of the transfer and make certain that you're spending the costs in accordance with program requirements. So we do not manage that for you. It's managed by the LEA. So when I take my GRA request that has now extra 1A dollars, right? But some of them are really still blue because the GRA thinks they are blue marbles. It's easiest to manage that if you create a special account code to identify those transferred costs. It keeps it cleaner in your budget. You're more readily able to identify that it was used through transferability. So also best practice, you can see number 4 there is to submit a separate GRA request. And number 5 is the most important thing on this slide. In the notes field of the GRA request, please include that you're using transferability to transfer X funds to X, right? So Title II to Title I or Title IV to Title I. Ensure that your funds are checked for allowability under the correct grant. That's a little tricky. You're like, wait, what does that really mean? So those Title IV dollars have very specific things that you can do with them, but really they're Title I dollars now. So those dollars need to be spent under the allowability for the grant they have been transferred to, in this case, 1A. Okay, so we've talked about creating the separate pot of funds in your accounting system to keep track of that. It will be really, really helpful. If you're not able to do that, at a minimum, please indicate in the reports which parts of your expenses were used with transferability. Important also, if you happen to be identified for monitoring and you've transferred funds from one to another, you're not monitored on the grant program that you have taken all your dollars out of. And we'll talk about that in just a moment with the word all. So if I had two-way funding and I transferred 100% of the funding into 1A, and I was going to be monitored, I would not be monitored on any 2A indicators. It would only be on the 1A. If all your dollars have been transferred out through the use of 5A, transferability, then you are no longer required to provide information during monitoring for that. So just something to keep in mind as you are preparing and looking at how to spend your funds. Okie doke. If you have a reimbursement request that includes expenses that'll use transferred funds and original grant funds, This goes back to consider submitting those separate GRA requests, one with the expenses using the transferred funds and one with the expenses using the original grant funds. The reason is it just keeps it so much cleaner and often will eliminate GRA requests being sent back for more explanation. Of course, that isn't always reasonable. So again, as I've mentioned, just clearly document every place you can in your note fields, which expenses are considered the original grant funds, which ones are considered transferred funds, and indicate that clearly in the documentation. What is what? As I also mentioned before, the LEA is responsible for maintaining those records, demonstrating how the program's total funds, including transferred funds, were spent. So you're going to need to keep track of that. And I know that's fairly simple to say, but not always easy to do. All right, if you've not used transferability before and you're thinking that maybe you will, and you're like, where do I even find it? It is down the left-hand side of the CFSGA. You can see it highlighted there. It's under the Title 4A as we go down in numerical order. So Title 5A, Funding Transferability. It's just a link on that menu on the left-hand side. I have a couple examples to indicate what it looks like. So in this particular case, on the Title 5A transferability page of the CFSGA, you can see there at the top, they had $10,000 in 4A. And so it's coming from that program. Then at the bottom, you see it's gone to Title 1A. So you see that $10,000 and you can clearly track it on this page to make certain that it's going where you think it's going, where you're trying to move it to. So also you're going to see that we're looking at the top here and we've got our allocation. This is a 1A screenshot. You've got some carryover listed there. There was no reallocation. Then you've got that dollar amount transferred from. So in this screenshot, there was possibly, it could have been from more than one program. That's a pretty big number. $191,000 is transferred from other programs through the use of 5A transferability. That all those numbers there are added up, and that's going to give you that new allocation. So once all those funds are transferred, then now they are considered as 1A funds, and they can be used for anything that is allowable under 1A. So this is what it looks like in the grants fund. In this example, so we've got some information here. You can see where you're going to be able to see in the budget on your 2A. This took the dollars from 2A and moved it into 1A. You can see that the dollars amounts there were not 100%. And this is something I alluded to earlier. So the allocation for 2A was the 3689. They transferred that first and the highlighted number 3673, which left a total allocation of $16 in their 2A. I'm not quite certain why they left $16. I'm thinking actually that it was probably just a keystroke error, because it would be really hard to do anything effectively with $16 in any given program, right? So additionally, they would also, if they were being monitored, have to meet the requirements for every single 2A indicator in the monitoring. So just be really cognizant when you're completing this that if you intend to leave $16, great. But if that was not your intention, if I saw this screen, I would probably reach out and say, is this what you really meant to do? But we might miss it. And then you would be, you would need to advise your CFSGA to correct that, or, you know, you could use the $16, whichever was your intention. Okie doke. So here we have that same $16, right? And so on your prior year expenditures, you're going to have to report that, and probably not what you want to do. The rest of the funds, you know, the other amount minus that $16 that were transferred are reported under the grant that they were transferred to. So in this case, we're talking about Title I. That's why you only see the $16 here, because the rest of that money was transferred to Title I. And so the screenshot that would go along with this would show those dollars in Title I. This is a copy of the top part of the GRA. We've got an example here. It was submitted under Title IV grant and was for salary and benefits. However, it was transferred to Title I, but on that prior screen, there was no indication that it was for with the use of transferability. So we've got the submitted salary and benefits for Title I, and then Michelle, as she explained, compares your application and your budget and your requests. And this one did not line up because they hadn't mentioned there was transferability there. So her comment back was, please verify this is under transferability to Title I and resubmit. So this LEA did that. We confirm this request is made under transferability for Title I for salaries and benefits, and then it was able to be processed. But you can see here in this example how important those notes are. Without that note, your request can't be processed. And so it takes some extra time and back and forth, and that will delay your drawdown. And then this very last page, you can see here that all of those salaries, so the money has been transferred from 4A into 1A, but it is reported in 251, which is the IFARMS code for Title I. So the documentation that was included to request it clearly showed what positions were paid and that the fund is 251, not for Title 4A. Right, that is a different IFARMS code. The LEA kept the funds separately from their original Title I allocation, which is, as we talked about, the best practice. So transferability opens a lot of opportunities. If the most often I see is 4A into 1A. Frequently, the purpose behind transferability is your allocation is so small that there are few things you can do that would be effective within your program, but adding that to a different allocation will help bolster the program you have running in under a different program, different grant. So that is transferability in a nutshell. And if you have any questions, now's the time for it. Okay, I will send it up for whoever is next. I think we might be going to a break.
That we are. So we'll see you guys in about 5 minutes. Should be about 2:33. Alrighty, folks, welcome back.
Okay. Is that my turn now?
Yep. Lisa, you're muted still.
There we go. Is that better?
Yep.
I lost all my functions. Okay, so we're going to go back to the outcomes. So right now we're going to go over what's new in the CFSGA. We're going to go over equitable services changes, some tribal consultation, fiscal self assessment, the FTE spreadsheet, and unsubmit requests. So the first thing we are going to do is equitable services. Hopefully. There we go. Okay. So right off, the purpose, the reason why we do equitable services, not only because it's required by law, but because LEAs are responsible for providing equitable services and benefits to eligible private school children and educators under ESEA. So there's a little more details here if you're interested in that. But what we're going to do is we're going to go over maybe. There we go. Some changes. Can you go to the next tab, please?
Yep.
Thank you. So. Okay, quit. Austin, stop. Okay, I need that general tab, please. Thank you. Okay, so the first changes are going to be on the general info tab. There, you'll notice that there's 3 new questions. The first question is going to be that the LEA has private schools participating this year. Some LEAs that participate, they have private schools that sometimes they participate, sometimes they don't. So you just want to make sure that, yes, you do have private schools participating this year, or no, you don't. If you do not have schools that are participating this year, and you usually do, you do have to upload that information, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The next one is a new one. It's if you pool funds with other districts for the private school, either yes or no on that. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then the LEA tests that all outreach, consultations, due diligence, everything has been done to the best of your ability this year. I do want to say that if you do not have equitable services, and you go into this tab and you hit yes or no, then you are now required to upload documentation by the way this is set up this year. So if you go into equitable services, you accidentally hit a button, and you know you don't have participating schools, you will have to upload a document that says, I'm sorry, I hit it by mistake. I don't have equitable services. So the best thing to do is, if you don't have equitable services, is to probably avoid this tab. Okay, so the next screen, what you're going to find this year is we've set it up a little differently. We want to make sure that you get all of the proper documentation uploaded. The reason for this is your CFSGA will not be approved if you do not have all the proper documents for equitable services. So it's very important to us that you get all the right documents in, so that way it doesn't hold up your CFSGA. So what you'll get is validation issues that look like this. Maybe you're missing affirmation of consultation, or the planning templates from the schools or your student count spreadsheets. So just make sure, and we'll go on to another screen that shows you where you upload all of those. Okay, and if you say yes, you do pool with other districts. There is an agreement this year that you'll find on the Equitable Services webpage on our federal programs page. It's an agreement between the districts that say, this was the one managing the districts, this is the one contributing money. So if you say yes to pooling, you have to upload this agreement in some form. The next one is, like I said, if you said, no, we don't have any districts this year, then you're required to upload either the intent to participate form saying they don't want services, or your green copy of the certified letter with no response, or an email saying, I don't want to participate, stop contacting me. Whatever it is, we need proof that private school turned down those services for this school year. Real quick, this is the new supporting document tab. Each document will have its own upload. Like you can see here, there's two on this side. So you'll have an intent to participate, an affirmation of consultation, the planning templates from the schools, your student count spreadsheets. If you said yes to the pooling agreement, you'll have to have that uploaded. Anything else that you have, there'll be an other to upload anything else that you want to upload for supportive documentation. Again, that's new this year due to the fact that we had a lot of districts forgetting documents, and we want to make sure that to get you approved as soon as possible. So hopefully that makes it just a little bit easier. This is just a quick view of the pooling agreement. It does look a little bit different than this now, but it's on, like I said, the Equitable Services page. You'll need to have the managing district and all contributing districts and the private school all need to sign this form. Again, it's a sample. It's not a legal binding document, but it's something that we're doing this year. So make sure you take a look at that. And that's all I have. So are there any questions?
Lisa, there's one that just says, where can we get the templates for the private schools to sign?
All of the templates, the intent to participate, the pooling agreement, all of those forms are on the website under the Equitable Services tab under federal programs. So you should be able to find everything you need there. Okay. Okay, I think I'm all done.
All right. One of the other new changes this year is related to tribal consultation. And I've been blessed for a while with being able to get a little bit closer to the work that our tribes are doing around educating their children and working with our schools in partnership with schools to ensure that their kids are being successful. And so out of that work is really why we have this consultation requirement embedded in the application. For most of you, this might not apply, but for many of you, you either have a tribe in your area or you have students from one of our tribes in Idaho who attend your school. And this would be an important consideration for you, especially right now at this point in the school year. So just like all of our other collaborations that we do leading up to our plans for next year in federal programs, right now would also be that encouragement to check your student enrollment, see if you have any students and be reaching out to the tribes to bring them into your conversations around your title programs. And so this would be that time to begin that work. The legal requirement for this kicks in if you have a tribe within your boundary, and you have more than 50% of your student enrollment identified as Native American or Alaskan Native in your SIS. And so that's where this kicks in, where it is absolutely required. You have to do this. And in that case, not only do you need to just provide some meaningful collaboration and invite the tribes into your Title I committees and other planning activities, but you at this point would also have to get signed written feedback from tribal officials. So for many of you that you don't hit that threshold, but a strong encouragement would be that if you have any students from one of our tribes, that you provide opportunities for meaningful collaboration, even though you're not at that triggering this requirement. And yes, Andrea, I see that. For it to be a hard and fast requirement, it is both, but we would encourage you to do it anyway. I think we're seeing, just like with all the rest of our community engagement, this is an important one. So it's an encouragement. But yeah, the trigger officially is that you have both, one in your boundary and then more than 50% of your enrollment. So what you're going to see in the CFSGA is on the very last portion, when you go to submit, there's now going to be a new tab, and it says Tribal Consultation. And on that tab, it will give you the requirements right out of ESEA. It also gives at the very top there just kind of the two pieces that I just did on the slide, outlining the requirement. The other thing you're going to see is a suggested process for consultation. So whether you're doing this because you do hit that threshold and you need to, or you are just working to meaningfully involve the tribe anyway, this can be a decent process for you to consider to get started if you're not already there. If you do meet the requirement and you have to submit written feedback, now what you'll have at the bottom of the tab is the upload section for you to upload that file. So this won't trigger as a requirement to submit. For most of you, you can just peruse the tab, use it as a reminder to check your enrollment and see if this is something that you should be doing, and then move on. But you're going to see this embedded now within your application. Fairly straightforward. And Andrea, I think I already snagged your question, but any other questions regarding tribal consultation? Andrea, it should be in the 25-26 in the new CFSGA now. You should see this in there. And again, it's in that submit assurance section at the very end. All right.
Alrighty. So get into the fiscal revisions to the application. So the first section that we're going to mess with is going to be the fiscal self-assessment. You're going to find that in the CFSGA should be the second little button right below Equitable Services. It'll show right below your status of the application. You might have Unsubmit Requests shown there too once you have already submitted the application. But this is where we're looking for right now. And if you want to follow along on your end in your own CFSGA, we're going to pull up this section and then go to the very end of the self-assessment. The three new items in the self-assessment are the last three. So you got to go through everything else. If you'd like some help on the first 18 items, if memory serves, just feel free to reach out to me via email. We can have a chat about it, but those haven't changed from last year. So we're not covering those in numerical order. We're going to cover them in kind of a storytelling type method. The first one I want to cover is item number 21 for procurement thresholds. So in the past, there was some confusion, and it's kind of poorly defined or recorded or written out what what the procurement requirements are if you're going to mess with federal funding when it comes to large purchases. So what we've done is we've built out within the fiscal self-assessment what your LEA's policy should be for federal procurement when you're using federal funds. Now, this probably isn't something you're going to mess with a ton. Most districts don't have enough funding for any of this to really kick in, but it's something you have to have in policy regardless of what you're actually going to do with the money. So if you look at your own policy and look what you have here, I basically got a guide for you of what your fiscal thresholds are at each stage in the procurement. There's some discussion about the possibility of self-certifying a micro purchase threshold from $10,000 up to $50,000. Basically, just one more mechanism for you to lower the administrative burden of federal procurement within your district. Not a lot of districts have to mess with it, but if you'd like to, this is an option for you. Some districts have already done it. And naturally, federal code is kind enough to defer to the more stringent requirement if they aren't providing the more stringent requirement, meaning if the federal level is more stringent than state and local, you have to use the federal requirement. If state and local requirements are more stringent than the federal one, you go to state and local, even though it's not the state and local. Yeah. So in our case in Idaho, the federal thresholds bounce between federal and state as you move down the procurement ladder. So in this section, I've got the relevant federal code and the relevant Idaho code that shows what you're subject to, and then defines which one's more stringent as you go down. So you should be able to effectively extrapolate what your policy should be from the information here. In terms of actions required, all that we're asking from you is to mark that you acknowledge it. To see anything out of your own procurement policy for this section, I just want to know that you've seen it and you've read it and you understand it. Now, a bit more interesting one is the revision to a section on equipment definition. So equipment for federal funding is defined as any individual asset with a useful life greater than 1 year and an individual cost greater than the district's asset capitalization threshold, or a computing device with an individual value greater than the asset capitalization value. And that asset capitalization threshold in your district can be any number in your district that you choose between $0 and $10,000. Basically, what the threshold is at which you're going to begin depreciating an item that's useful for more than a couple of years, more than a single year, rather. So if you're buying a forklift, that's probably an asset worth depreciating. That would pretty firmly fall on the equipment side of things. If it's something like, I don't know, an easel that isn't worth enough to be depreciated over multiple years, you're just going to leave it as a piece of supplies. So in this box, what I'm asking you for is what your district's asset capitalization threshold is to define what equipment is. In previous years, it was discussed that anything over $5,000 is considered equipment and anything under isn't. Technically speaking, you do have the option to lower that threshold to whatever you want. The upper ceiling has been raised from $5,000 to $10,000 this most recent year. So now you have the freedom as a district to pick any number between those two. The reason I'm collecting this is that if we at a state level, if we at a state level haven't collected from you what your capitalization threshold is, we don't know how to set the requirements for capital objects out of you. So we don't know what your district is actually requiring in terms of what is and isn't a piece of equipment, what is and isn't a capital object, what is and isn't required to be inventoried, that sort of thing. So in essence, whatever this number you put in this box is going to be your equipment threshold, your capital object threshold across the board. What that effectively means is that in general, there may be some small programmatic exceptions, but in general, any object you purchase that is greater than this threshold, whatever you put in that box, is going to be subject to inventory requirements, disposition requirements, and your capital expense forms are probably going to be required as well. Anything under that isn't required to it. It's just considered supplies. So my personal recommendation and the best practice recommendation from the State Department is to use the highest level, the highest number you can possibly justify. Sometimes there's great reasons why you want to impose a more stringent requirement on your district just to keep a stronger fund control. But in general, it's probably, it may behoove your district to lower that administrative burden on you. Now, given that in most cases, you are not required to inventory anything that is over the individual value that you place in this box, you still as a district probably should be collecting inventory on a lot of the things you buy. If you're buying an individual iPad in Title 1A, for example, technically speaking, that doesn't necessarily get over that equipment threshold, but you as a district or business manager, federal program director, probably want to keep an eye on your iPads to make sure they're not walking off after a year. So once again, a best practice that we're recommending is that if you're going to have a less stringent inventory policy for items that you just want to inventory and not that you have to, I would outline that in your policy and say, this is a discretionary policy. We may elect to inventory items at these standards in the event that the item's cost is over whatever threshold we've set, probably $10,000. We're going to then impose the federal level requirements, which are outlined here. So that way, if an auditor walks into your building, sees, okay, well, you're inventorying an iPad, all the items on the iPad's inventory don't meet what the federal requirement is, and that's a finding. We don't want that. We want them to be able to trace what you've actually done to your policy, so it's not a finding if you do something more creative outside the scope of what's written. To help out with this threshold, we revised the inventory template available on the website. If you go to the federal programs page and go to the monitoring tab, which we'll actually go to real quickly. I say quickly. Under federal programs, head to monitoring. And there's an inventory template for you to use right here. If you really like to use a new template that has all the field requirements that you would need when completing inventory up to a federal standard. So easily downloadable from there. Now, get back to this guy. Okay. So the way this is also built in the CFSGA is we've improved some of the logic inside of it. So when you have not quite finished the fiscal self-assessment in the CFSGA yet, if you go over into any of the budget tabs in any of your programs, you'll see in the capital objects line that the description will still say, hey, please complete the fiscal self-assessment. Means you haven't finished it yet, just go have a look at it, make sure you finished it. Once you have finished it, and you've entered something into that box, that means that whatever you've put in that box is going to transcribe into the capital objects budget description of all of your programs. So in this case, a district had elected a capital objects threshold of 8450. That's actually going to display in all of their programs at 8450 in each of those sections, because that's what's requiring a capital expenditure form. Now, this also works if you just leave $0 in there. Now, that's a pretty quick red flag to the reviewers that either one of two things, either you just left it blank and didn't put anything in there, because by default it is $0, or that you enjoy imposing extraordinarily stringent requirements upon yourself and you're intending to follow through with a capital object request, and for every single supply, every single individual pencil that you purchase for the remainder of the year. That's frankly ridiculous. So I'm going to go ahead and defer to the original assessment, which you haven't put a number in there. If you're not sure and you want to get to this later and you don't want to hold up the entire application, just by default, put $10,000 in there and then have a chat with your business manager to make sure that your policy is up to snuff. The citations are listed in there, so it should be easy to research. The other piece of this is that just because you're never going to exceed this doesn't mean you don't have to have a policy for it. It's kind of a through line. You have to have the accommodations in policy ready in the event you ever do have an investment in this direction. Not even suggesting you necessarily should. In Title 1A, the odds of you having a object over $10,000 individually that needs to have a CEF is relatively slim. How often is it that instead of investing in some classroom supplies or a paraprofessional, you're going to go ahead and invest in something large like a $50,000 piece of software. That does happen, but it's not exactly common. It isn't necessarily always the best way to plan your spending. So be cognizant that just because it is there doesn't mean something we're recommending. We just need to make sure you have infrastructure in place in the event you go that direction. So in the event you have any individual items in your supplies and materials budget line, those 400s, and the individual cost ends up being greater than whatever the threshold is in your CFSGA, you're going to have to complete a capital expense request form, which is going to be found on our website via jot form. And basically what you're doing is you're going to fill that out before you actually make the purchase, but not necessarily before you finish the application. So say the application gets submitted in June. I want to buy a small bus for migrant in October. I don't need to have the CEF completed before June. I need to have it done before October when I actually go to make the purchase. What you're going to do is you're going to pull up the jot form. You're going to fill it out. It'll get sent to us. I'll route it to the coordinator that's required to give it a look. They'll sign off on it. You'll get a copy of the signed request, and then you'll attach that to the GRA so that when Michelle is reviewing your expense request, she can see that it has been reviewed and it has been signed by all parties. If you request reimbursement for something over your threshold and it hasn't been approved or the CEF isn't attached, it's going to be a rejection. So this is one more level of infrastructure that's required if you're going to invest in something that's greater than whatever this threshold is. Another reason why you should probably not set it at $200. You're welcome to, but bear in mind there are consequences to doing that. The Fiscal Self Assessment tab, Susan, if you're not seeing it, you may not be logged in, you may be logged in as the correct person. Yeah, we'll have to have a look at what's going on there. So the final item is the inventory policy requirement. This is item number 20 in the Fiscal Self Assessment. In essence, this is some more approachable language describing the requirements in 313D, talking about what is actually required of a district, what items are required, and where an inventory template may be. It's basically saying you have to have policy in place for inventory, even if you don't actually have to keep inventory per your own policy, or you never actually activate any of these thresholds. Whether or not you actually do it or have to do it, you have to have policy on hand. Okay, any questions there? And Susan, we'll connect with you after the webinar to see what's going on there. All good, cool. Cool. So we got another new toy associated with the CFSGA for this year. So as Michelle mentioned earlier, we have replaced the old FTE sheet, an old template that not everybody even knew existed. This new sheet is going to be the standard. It is going to be required from everybody. It's the template we're going to be using. Oh, good deal, Susan. Glad to see it. So we're going to go ahead and everybody moving forward is going to be using the same template. That is with the intent that on our end, if we're reviewing 188 applications every single year, we're going to have a much easier time locating relevant information rapidly when everybody's using the same template. It also means that we're only requiring information that is going to be actively useful to us and not imposing any extra requirements on you where you're putting effort into collecting data that isn't actually required. So why is this even changing in the first place? Just as an aside, I mean, I spent some years in a district. When I was working in the district, I didn't have a huge problem with the FTE spreadsheet, but it wasn't exactly super intuitive, wasn't the easiest to use, and had a lot of information required. And we kind of had to touch base and revise it a few times throughout the year. I found myself uploading a few different copies and, you know, was thought to myself that it wasn't exactly the most streamlined. And when I recently joined the State Department team, I found that that was a shared feeling amongst most of the team. And there was a collective effort to build this out and revise it and improve it for this upcoming year. We've generally revised it so that we're only collecting information that's actively useful. We're not going to add extra burden to you that's not required. And we're going to try and collect what we do need in an easy, fast way. So this new sheet is built in a way that it's designed to be completed by your federal programs director more than your business manager. So you shouldn't have to go across the hall as much. Not to say you shouldn't, still have communication open, but a program director or a principal should be able to glance at this and fill it out relatively easily. Now, some of the consequences of this change is that you're going to see in each of your program budgets as you move through the tabs, this section under salaries will have a revised piece of text that now says you need to upload a position and stipend supplement file on the assurance and submit file, or submit and assurance page rather. So instead of in previous years where each individual program, in this case it's Title 1A, there was a spot for your FTE spreadsheet. Now, instead of having 6 or 7 different upload sites for the same spreadsheet, all of those uploads have been consolidated in one place. So it's going to be under your Submit and Assurance tab at the very bottom. There's a Files section. This is going to be the same area of your CFSGA that previously saw upload of the GEPA statement. This is also where you can find your Title VI certification. So once you're in this section, that middle item is going to be the position and stipend supplement upload site. And if you push that big blue hyperlink looking piece of text, you will automatically download a template for you to work with. So it should be really easy to access. In addition, you'll also see some validation error at the top of the screen, right under that red text that has some goofy grammar in it. This is just one more reminder that if you have nothing uploaded there, you're required to get that spreadsheet uploaded to it. So at this point, I'm going to transition screens and go show you guys what this actually looks like in person, just so we can work through it together. So say I'm in the CFSGA already. So in Title I, it's got that text being shown as small as it is. That's in Submit and Assurance. I'm going to scroll all the way down, go to Submit and Assurance. Navigate to the Files tab, and here's my big blue link. Click on it, and it'll download. And here we are. So this first tab is going to be instructions for you, the users. This information touches on what the point is, what the cells mean, what information is being collected, and how to input data, as well as a bunch of worked examples of I have X number of paras in X number of buildings. What's that going to look like? A few different worked examples as you move through it. Additionally, towards the bottom, it's some instructions about how this extrapolates into the GRA. So as you work through it, it should have all the information you need. I've also got this built in a way where if you try and print it, it will only print relevant information and it won't just eat a ream of paper for you. So hopefully that works okay for you. If you get any issues or bugs with the spreadsheet itself, please go ahead and reach out. Let me know. I can get this fixed pretty quickly if there's any bugs. So by all means, don't hesitate to let me know if there's something that breaks. In the positions tab section of it, this is where you're going to be listing which positions you're going to be funding with each of your grant programs and how their time splits out, as well as which building they're working in. So in the example text that's already here, I have what the job title is, basically determining, what responsibilities this person's going to have. You're going to give a distribution of how many positions are filling this archetype. Going to show which building they're working in. This is specifically important for your Title 1A funded folks because, you can't have a Title 1A funded employee in a non-Title 1A served building. So if we see anything in this column for Title 1A, this all of the schools, or at least a proportion of the schools shown here, should be Title 1A served buildings. So you got your work site. You're also going to use this section of the spreadsheet to demonstrate what the average number of hours each employee is working under each of these programs in a given week. So it's built out where the number of hours are not specifically what is important. What is important for us on our end is the relative proportion of their time. So if you've got a 20-hour paraprofessional like this individual is, this para is spending all of their 20 hours under Title 1A. And that's all that's important to us. This other individual is working 2/3 of their time under Title 1A, or pardon, 3/4 of their time under Title 1A and 1/4 of their time under not Title 1A. So in their time and effort billing and their general spread of their time over the course of the year, we should see at the end that 3/4 of their time was under Title 1A and 1/4 was not. That allows that paraprofessional to spend 1/4 of their time in either non-Title 1A buildings or on non-Title 1A approved activities. So that's extra flexibility for you. This tab on the far right, the one that mentions FTE, this is not necessarily a required element of you, but what we found in the previous spreadsheets and in previous drawdowns was that many districts had different definitions internally of what was considered one FTE. This is effectively an arbitrary election to demonstrate that we're all on the same page and we're all using the same benchmark. So if you do choose to use FTE in your CFSGA descriptions and GRA descriptions, that we're at least using the same terminology. But in general, what we're recommending towards and what we're trying to pivot towards is that you're giving us the gross count of distinct positions or distinct people in each position. So if I'm drawing down these 4 Title 1A paras, 2 in this archetype and 1 in each of these 2, all I'm saying in my drawdown request is that I've got 4 Title 1A paras. I don't need any FTE breakdown. I don't need any extra information in the GRA or the CFSGA that which buildings they're working in. All I need to know is how many there are and how many are going to appear in the backup documentation. So additionally, the general consensus is that if you have a slot for a paraprofessional or a slot for an interventionist in here, that is going to be greenlit in the GRA section. If you start claiming positions that do not exist in the spreadsheet or are not represented in the spreadsheet, that is when friction is going to begin. If I start claiming a 4 more instructional coaches than I have in this list, we're going to start reaching out to you and say, hey, you probably want to revise your CFSGA, revise your FTE spreadsheet to get these up to the same stuff. So just bear in mind, have a little bit extra fluff. Maybe have an extra position in here in the event you want to fill that spot out. So try to keep it reasonable. On the other end, if you have fewer positions actually filled than you have listed here, that's totally fine and allowable. You've got that wiggle room to go less than you planned, not just necessarily more. Cool. And this also is going to cover all of your federal programs. So you're going to be able to represent all of your migrant staff, all of your Title II stipend, or all of your Title II as supported positions, Title III EL paras, anybody in Title IV, that sort of thing. So additionally, there's also a stipend section. The stipends have basically totally different requirements and totally different information that's required. So they're not being buried under the position section. All we need under under stipends, pardon, is the funding program in order to determine which allowability rules you're going to be dealing with. How many stipends are going to appear in the drawdown requests against this? We're going to write down why we're awarding a stipend, trying to support why it's meeting the goals of the grant. Like Michelle mentioned earlier, you've got that big overarching theme of what this is for. How does what we're doing match up with that? And then we're also going to talk about who's actually receiving the stipend itself. For example, if I'm giving a Title II stipend, I can't give it to a counselor or somebody who's non-instructional because that's not how the grant works. We got to keep it to instructional for Title II. So all of the different items that would affect allowability are trying to be collected here. We're also going to name the stipend amount. Now, this is going to be the stipend amount maximum. A lot of the time, a stipend will be based on hours up to a cap. If you budget up to the cap in this section and say, yep, I'm going to award 10 stipends that are going to be $1,000 maximum, that's fine if you end up claiming 850 or 750 or 447 or whatever it ends up being, as long as it's not over that cap. But you should be able to tie what's in the GRA up to the supplement relatively cleanly. So moving from there, we're going to go back to the slide deck. and illustrate a little bit more about how that might work. So in the CFSGA, in this worked example, they've mentioned that they've got a full-time Title 1A paras, one EL para who's split funded, and one Title 1A interventionist, as well as some stipends for teachers to attend a Title 1A summer training. So in my positions section, I've got it isolated so that it's just those 3 positions for the Title 1A paras, interventionists, and the EL para, which buildings they're working into, how their time splits out. You can see that EL para is working half of their time within Title 1A and half their time in Title 3. In some cases, that is actually the same programmatic goal on the ground. They're doing the same thing all day long. You've just chosen to split fund because what they're doing is allowable under both programs. And then that stipend section towards the bottom explaining, yep, it's funded by Title 1A. You're going to issue 2 stipends. It'll be a summer training for these teachers at this amount up to maximum. So, and then once you've done that, you can then tie that back into your GRA. Pretty similar information, not super in depth. Just speaking to the supplement that you've already submitted. You want both those paras represented. One of those split funded EL paras, one Title 1A interventionist, and then a couple of stipends. Not a whole lot of detail, just enough to say that, yep, that thing that exists in my CFSGA, that's what I did, without saying exactly that. Cool. One more thing, just while we're on the topic, I'll take a second and show off some of the validation that's in here. If you go into any of these hours section, it's assumed that an employee is not being scheduled or being requested to work more than 40 hours in a single week. So if I enter something like 55 into this section, I'm going to get a validation error that shows, hey, it's got to be less than 40. On a similar note, I'm not able to mess with anything in these peach columns. These are all hard-coded formulas. So it would be relatively challenging to try and break these sections. And over in the stipend section, kind of similar logic, I can only enter numbers here. And the programs that are funding each of these stipends has a little drop-down menu for you to use. So it should be relatively quick to pick which program you want to use. You're not using the wrong language or something along those lines. Okay. Any questions on that supplement? That is going to be the required upload. If you upload your own section, we're going to very politely ask you to upload the same information in our template so we can more rapidly review it. All righty. Moving swiftly right along. Post-award revisions. This will be one more quick little section before we drop into one more 5-minute break. So this is the unsubmit request process. Post-award revisions is how it's referred to inside statute. So we've just got some more jargon tied to it. So just one more review. These are the 3 data points that we're asking for inside an unsubmit request. What are you changing? Why are you changing it? And how does the change meet the goal of the grant? It doesn't need to be an essay. It doesn't need to be super flowery or with 10-letter words or anything like that. It just needs to be exactly to the point of what you're changing and why. This is where you're going to find it. Once your application has been submitted, you'll see it right under that submitted status or approved status as well. What you're going to do is you're going to select which of the programs above you'd like to revise. And then down below in each of these 3 boxes, you're going to answer each of those 3 questions. Now, if you need to unsubmit more than one program at once, please do your best to record what all you're reviewing in each of these programs. As I mentioned, this is where the coordinators are going to look to see what they need to review most explicitly. If you're going to change salaries and benefits in 3 programs, you can just say salaries and benefits for all 3 programs, so each coordinator knows, yep, that's where I'm going to go. And as I kind of mentioned, this is retained within the comment section of your application and it lives in it forever. So if you put something silly or goofy, I will laugh at it in the moment. I like jokes, but unfortunately that will be a permanent joke we all get to look at forever. And another acceptable bit of response, if you have a GRA request that's sent back that needs to be input into your CFSGA, you're welcome to enter something in along the lines of, I'm updating this in order to get I'm updating this in order to be able to draw it down in the CFSGA, but you still need to be able to speak to why this change was necessary. That change doesn't need to be, that necessity requirement isn't super stringent. If it's because we couldn't hire a position, cool, write that, doesn't really matter. It could be something as simple as, hey, plans changed, we were gonna go with one PD, we decided to go with a different one. Or that PD fell through, we're gonna buy supplies with it instead. Just something simple that summarizes what the circumstances were. Oh, and each of these 3 boxes are gonna be required. If you don't have any information in one of these 3 boxes, when you try and submit, it'll just have a validation error and say, hey, put something in there, so. Any questions on the post-award revisions process, aka unsubmits? Wonderful. Looks like we're going to move to one last 5-minute break and then we're in the home stretch. See you guys in a few. All righty. Ready to get started up again. So this last section of the day is just going to be spent training on some relatively common sticking points within the application itself. The three sections we're going to touch on at the very end are going to be rank and serve and some of the nuances that live within that section. We'll touch on some of the nuances that exist within the prior year expenditures tab within each of the program budgets. And then finally, Maria is going to close us out with State EL and Title III LIEPs. So getting rolling into rank and serve. This section will be important to you rather if you have more than 1,000 students enrolled and if you have more than one building per grade span. And it's a relatively stringent definition of grade span, where if I have a K through 3, a K through 8, and a K through 12 building, I have 3 buildings within distinct grade spans because I don't have 2 K through 8s or 2 K through 8 or 2 K through 12s or anything along those lines. As long as my grade spans are unique, we're going to be good to go. So rank and serve is shockingly the practice of ranking and then serving your Title I-A schools. This will be within the third tab on the Title I-A budget, called Allocation to Schools. Ranking is effectively assigning a priority for service level to each of your school buildings based on low income percentage. And then serving is done by way of a per pupil allocation to that school. That per pupil allocation must abide by the priority for service ranking that's been applied to the school. And that PPA is also applied to the number of low-income children identified in that school, not the full enrollment. So getting rolling on in. At the very bottom of the allocation and set-asides tab should be tab number 2 in your CFSGA. This will be the amount available to your schools. This is basically your allocation overall, plus any carryover you have from the previous year, less any of your set-asides. So your homeless, your parent engagement set-aside, your admin set-aside, indirect costs, anything along those lines will detract from your allocation, and then you will leave you with this final amount towards the bottom with what is the pool of funding available to give to all your schools. Once you got that number, you know what to work with for the next one. So once we move over to the allocation to schools section, as I mentioned, this is within Title I-A. The very first thing you're going to do when you get to this tab is you're going to verify that all of the schools that are shown within this tab are correct. Basically saying there aren't any buildings in this list that have previously closed and they haven't been removed from the list yet. You don't have any new schools that are missing, that sort of thing. If a school's name is incorrect, that is an issue that we can fix, but it's not quite as essential as a school being missing or included falsely. So once you have determined that all of the schools there are correct, you're going to go ahead and press this little square button right under the rank and serve description there for you. That's how it'll look. Now, in the event the list of schools is not correct, that means the data that we have on our end in ICE is out of date, and you'll have to reach out to me or school finance to get a copy of a school reconfiguration request so we can get that updated within IC and updated in the CFSGA itself. So the methods you have available to rank your schools for priority of service, you've got 2 options. You're going to rank your schools based on their overall standing amongst each other, which is the way that they're displayed by default. When you open up the CFSGA, you can't reorder the schools there. So the order they're displayed in is the highest low-income rating all the way down to the lowest low-income percentage. The other option that will require some a worksheet outside of the application itself, probably in Excel, is going to be a grade span ranking. So you're going to break up your schools by whichever grade span they're in. Like I said, pretty strict definition. So once you've broken those out, you can rank within those grade spans. These grade span rankings don't affect each other. They're not up against the same ranking anymore. You're effectively ranking in 4 different chunks or 5 different chunks or 2 different chunks, whichever you want to do. What's most common is you'll see an elementary chunk, a middle school chunk, and a high school chunk. So once you have ranked your schools, that ranking is going to stick to that building for the remainder of this worksheet. Once you, and one more thing before I get too carried away into the nuance of what rank and serve looks like. Once you have pressed that, yes, all my schools are there and correctly shown, please go ahead and save. Once you save, you'll get access to manipulate any of the data in there and be able to add in what your allocation to those schools are. So at this stage, you're probably working with a spreadsheet that's off the actual application itself. So I won't be constantly saying, hey, save after this step and save after the next step as well. Most of this is going to be calculation on your end. I do have a worksheet that I built out that demonstrates some of the different nuances and pros and cons and how it might look in your district. I can show you real quick. It will be within the federal programs webpage under funding and fiscal accountability, under training. So there'll be a rank and serve demo here for you. If you would like to try and follow along with some of the different spreadsheets I put on screen, the spreadsheet here is what these examples are built out of. So you can look at this later if you'd like to, look at this now, whichever you'd prefer. But those are the numbers I'm messing with. So within this guy, there's 3 methods of determining a school's eligibility. By far and away, the easiest and simplest is looking to see if the school's low income percentage is greater than 35% or equal to 35%. If it's over 35% or you're at 35%, it's automatically eligible to receive services if you'd like. Another option is that you can measure it against what is the district's aggregate low income percentage. So basically, let's say I, as a district, have a bunch of schools. The average aggregate low income across the entire district is 28%. I then have the option to serve any school that is greater or equal to 28% low income. The final one is a little more nuanced and a relatively new option, not something the SD has talked about in the past, but it is possible for you. In essence, within those same grade span rankings or grade span groups that we used for ranking earlier, you can calculate the aggregate low income percentage among those schools and use that low income percentage to gauge eligibility within that grade span. So, for example, I have a cluster of elementary schools, all K through 5. If that K through 5 cluster has an aggregate low income percentage of 12%, I can serve any school within that grade span greater than 12% or equal to 12%, even if the district overall has a low income percentage of like 45, or it's well below 35, it's well below the 45 of the district overall. I have that extra flexibility, but that's only an option and doesn't it only opens up doors if the aggregate low income level of this grade span is below that of the district overall. So okay, so like I said, we're speaking to that spreadsheet for right now for a second. In the district-wide section, this is what it would look like. I've got my ranking moving from number 1 all the way down to number 12 in order of low income. I've also got one school marked eligible by virtue of the fact that they were eligible in a previous year. We do have the option to give a school a special exception in the first year that they're no longer eligible to receive services, meaning they've dropped below all 3 of those eligibility possibilities. So besides them, the only schools that are eligible are ones that move from above 75%, which you have to serve this school, all the way down until we hit just above what the district average or aggregate is. So 32% is our magic number here. We're going to serve schools at 33 and upwards. In terms of grade span, we've got 4 different grade spans here. We've got one alternative academy all by itself. It's above 75%. It's in its own ranking. We can serve it all we want, and we have to serve it because it's over this threshold. But the high schools, they're broken out. I can serve this high school more than this other high school. But these 2 schools don't have to be served more than anything else in this spreadsheet because they're all in their own little rankings. This also demonstrates that grade span aggregate nuance I talked about earlier, how in the middle school span, for example, if this school here with 8%, well, the bottom of the 2 would never, but in essence, the three ways this school could have been eligible is measured against what the district average is at 32%, what the total was at 35%, you can measure against 35, and it's going to be up against 20% as well. And Megan, the rank and serve demo is under the training tab, under the funding and fiscal accountability section of the federal programs page. So if you do a special exception in the CFSGA itself for a school, this menu off to the right-hand side to the right of what the low-income data shown is, we'll have a little drop-down section for a special exception. The other item there will be the feeder pattern option, which we'll touch on in a minute. Okay, it's a minute later. Jumped the gun on that one. So feeder pattern, in essence, if I have a secondary school that is not eligible, I've got no options to serve it in any of the previous structure. Think of that 8% school we just looked at. I have another option in terms of determining that school's eligibility through feeder pattern. What I'm doing is effectively taking the entire population of schools that feed into the secondary school and using that overall population to determine what the aggregate low income of those schools is. And I can then apply that low income percentage to the secondary school's enrollment. So for example, in this secondary school, I've got 100 low income kids and 1,000 kids overall, like all enrolled. That's not eligible. It's only 10%, not high enough to be served. But if all of the elementary school students that feed into that, in schools that feed into that secondary, end up being a 50% low income across all those schools, half of those kids are all low income, I can take that 50% and apply it to my secondary school's enrollment. So I've gone from 100 low income kids in that secondary school to 500. Even though the actual number is only 100, for all of my calculations and everything on my end, I'm going to use that 500 number. So with that previous example in mind, remember how it was 36% and 8% for my two middle schools? Now that I've redone this, with those with the feeder pattern elementary schools added back in, middle school 1 has gone from 8% to 42%. It's a pretty significant jump. It's eligible by all standards now. It's one of the higher low income schools in the entire district. And the other one wasn't harmed too terribly much by this option. So why wouldn't I do this if this is extra flexibility? Well, the example shown on screen is a scenario in which all of the schools in that secondary grade level are benefited by this choice. You'll note that I didn't do it to high schools, even though I did it to middle schools. I can choose to do it just with individual secondary grade spans and not just every secondary level. But if I do want to do this, I have to go talk to both those middle schools on the record and get an acknowledgement that I was told that we want to do this and permission to do it. I have to get a majority vote basically to say, yes, I'm good to go. Now, if middle school 2 had said, I don't want to do rank and serve because it hurts my eligibility and I'm not going to get any money from doing this, they can say no. And if you only have 2 schools, 50% is not a majority, it's half. So in a scenario where you only have 2 secondary schools in a grade span, you can have one school just stomp their feet and keep you from doing this, but you do have to get their consultation all the same, because you can't just do it to one school in that grade span. You've got to apply it to the whole grade span. So, like I just said, you've got to get a majority approval from everybody involved, and you're going to recalculate the low income count for all those schools. If you do a feeder pattern for any of your schools, or for all of your secondary schools, or for a certain section of your secondary schools, reach out to me directly and we'll get the numbers revised in your CFSGA. Also put a comment in your CFSGA describing your methodology, put it on the record. Those comments live as a part of the application forever. So it's a great spot to record your methodology. That's a great discussion for the other third style of eligibility with the grade span eligibility. If you do explore that, which you're welcome to, it's more complicated, it's a little bit more math intensive, but you're welcome to do it. If you do, make sure you put it in a comment there to let us know what's going on. Because on our end, if we're reviewing your application and we just see a random school at 18% marked as eligible, but it's not ranked as special exception or feeder pattern or anything crazy, we're going to think, well, Can't do that. So just let us know what's in there and let an auditor know and what's happening from 4 years in the future. Speak to it, keep it obvious. So there's one more feeder pattern demonstration for you. And then once we have done all of that work in terms of, finagling eligibility, we're going to get to the part where we're actually serving the schools with money. So as you enter data into the CFSGA, you're doing it in the white box on the far right that says allocation. You're not actually entering what the per pupil allocation is, but in my best practices, what I'm doing in an Excel sheet is to set a formula that multiplies the number of low-income students by a per pupil allocation column that I've got set up. So that number for 77,470 is just spitting out of a formula. So I can very deliberately mess with the PPA for each of my schools. And I'm trying to back myself into that number that we saw before of the total amount of funding I have available to allocate to my schools. So the spreadsheet, the actual application asks for the total amount, but when you're messing with it and you're backing into that number, I would base my calculations based on what that PPA is. So a violation of rank and serve rules or rank order, that sort of thing. Remember, bear in mind that ranking for priority of service is like the Bible I have to abide by. If I have a school within the same rank order as another school, I can't serve a higher ranking school less per pupil than a lower ranking school. So in this example, I've got two schools, one at 46%, one at 43%, presumably in the same grade span, or even not necessarily if they're doing overall ranking. In that left example on the bottom, they've served less money per student to the higher low-income school than to the lower low-income school. That's, you're out of priority order. You can't do that. On the other hand, you've got $600 per student for the higher low-income school, $598 for the lower low-income school. That's totally fine, totally good to go. You can, in fact, keep an allocation per pupil steady for more than one school, even as you move up the ranking, as long as a school lower in the ranking isn't greater than the school higher than it, you're going to be fine. You could do every school in the ranking all the same PPA, as long as nobody at the bottom is higher than anybody else above them, they're fine. So a couple other caveats. You're not required to serve every single school that's eligible. In fact, a lot of LEAs will prioritize services to their highest needs school in order to put more funding available to serve the highest needs areas. The only schools you're required to serve are schools over 75% low income. You lose discretion on those. You have to put money in that building. So another caveat is you're still bound by rank and serve order. So if I've got schools 1 through 5 that I want to serve, but school number 3 doesn't really need the money, I can't serve school number 4 and 5 unless I give school number 3 money. $0 still counts as an allocation, and any money in school 4 with 0 in school 3 breaks rake order. Okay, here is a fun bit of nuance that hasn't been discussed much. So this one's news for basically everybody who hasn't spent hasn't spent a year with their nose in the blue book from Bruman or 2 CFR in depth. So in essence, if you serve any school for any reason under 35% low income, like you're really trying to push open flexibility for where you can put title funded paras, if you go below 35%, there's an extra rule you have to abide by. In essence, once you cross that threshold, 35%, you must serve every school at least 125% of the district's overall PPA. So that's the full allocation for the district divided by the total number of students in the district area. So that's equitable. That's private school students and students enrolled. And that rule only applies to every school besides the lowest ranking building. So if I have all of my schools over 35% and I've got one under 35%, the rule is activated, but I'm not required to keep that bottom school above that threshold. I can serve them whatever they want. They can, in statute, get the scraps of whatever funding is left. You can give them $20 if you want to. But the schools that are above them, that are, even if they're over 35%, must get at least that 125% threshold. So, a couple of work scenarios for you. Like I just said, you've got one school under 35% being served, high school number 1 towards the bottom. It's the one highlighted in yellow. That school can be served whatever I want, but everybody else in that rank order has to get a per pupil allocation greater than $33.53. So that's shown in the very bottom table there for you. As long as everybody's over that $33 a number, you're good to go. And since the next school in the rank order goes to 35, we're safe. Now, in a scenario in which I'm going to serve multiple schools under 35%, as long as I'm not breaking rank order again, I have the option of breaking that 125% rule with the lowest ranking school. In this scenario, elementary school number 3, the very bottom highlighted text in the per pupil allocation column has $71. I could have served them less than the $33, but I didn't. Just because I waived that choice doesn't mean everybody else gets to break the rule too. When I go up the order, the other school I'm serving below 35% is high school number 1. So I've got to hit that floor at the very least. If I want to give them money, I've got to give them at least that much. The other high school number 2, I'm not giving them money, so I don't have to meet that threshold. So just because the lowest low ranking school isn't bound to it, doesn't mean it breaks the rule for everybody else. So hopefully in future years, there will be infrastructure in place within the application to tell you what this threshold is. Should make it pretty obvious. For right now, this requirement was discussed a little late in the application development for this last year. So next year, hopefully we'll have some more infrastructure to support this exact requirement. Okay. Any questions on rank and serve?
Yeah, Austin, there were a couple that would be worth going back to.
Sure.
Which is probably more a position stipend actually than rank and serve.
Okay.
It's okay. So the question was about if you're a 4-day week and you're running off of 32 hours and it auto calculates FTE.
Mm-hmm.
The first part of that question was, can we change the formula within the spreadsheet? But maybe also talk to just FTE calculation and if we need it or not.
Sure. So in the spreadsheet, it is hard coded to be based on a 40-hour week, but that is effectively a stopgap to make sure we're all speaking the same language of what a full-time equivalent is. So even in if in your district, a 32-hour position is truly considered a full-time position, even then in the sheet, it would show as 0.8, but we're pushing as hard as much as we can to ask everybody to just use the granular number of distinct positions instead of naming FTE. So yes, it will only show 0.8 or 0.75 FTE in that section, but when you're doing drawdowns and you just name one position or 5 positions in that slot, that'll suffice. So yes, it'll be goofy, but it really shouldn't affect much. Did I answer the question, hopefully, Jessica?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and I think I misunderstood this question, so I'm glad you answered it live, but maybe say it again. If people want to dig deeper into rank and serve, where's the demo for that?
Sure. So in the federal programs page, under the funding and fiscal accountability, it'll be the purple button towards the top and highlights. The rank and serve training is hidden under the training tab that we haven't used much. So there's a presentation here that has a bunch of documentation that I just shared. The slide deck is also in the chat here if you'd like. I believe it was also sent out via email yesterday. So you get information that I gave today. But this is a more concentrated look with a bit more text on screen to describe some of the nuances. This one's kind of doubling as a written resource as well as a PowerPoint. And then the actual demo itself is the spreadsheet just below it. That's where we talk about some of the nuances, and you can see some of the different scenarios that are possible. While I'm on the subject of the spreadsheet and methodology for allocating funding, That's important to outline that there really isn't a perfect or a fancy feeling method to allocate funding to schools. You're really going to kind of guess and check to get funding into those buildings. My experience in a district would say that the best method was to determine which of my buildings was going to get the least funding overall and build my rank and serve around getting enough funding into that building to support at least the paras they have on hand from last year, and maybe some additional to support some extra programs beyond that. So as long as all the schools have enough money on hand to meet their needs, you're going to be doing fine. And if you're having trouble reconciling what is in the allocation and set aside screen for your amount available, so I'll go to the beta so we're not telling on Hanson. But if I go to Aberdeen, if I'm having trouble backing into this number exactly, it's not out of the question to just mess with the numbers that's elsewhere in this set aside section to get a more workable figure in here. So if I'm really having trouble backing in allocations to my schools to end up at 542 in the last 3 digits, I can do that and end up with $257,000 flat. So there's some manipulation possible to get you over that finish line. Any other questions there? Or are we good to move on to prior expenditures? Cool. So last section of the day from my side, and we're going to move to Maria, is the prior year expenditures section. This will be tab number 4. Personally, I recommend, not personally, general advisory from the departments that is to handle this tab first. The numbers in this tab are going to feed into everywhere else in the application for everywhere else in this program as best you can. It'll fill in what your carryover amounts are in the allocation and set asides tab, allocation to schools tab, and the Title 1A budget section. As it sits, there is a relatively interesting interaction where if you open up this section, leave it, and then come back to it, it will set your carryover amount and all other tabs as the maximum until you actually go through and fill out prior year expenditures for the previous year. So general best practice is to handle this tab first as you open the application. Now, naturally, there's a bit of a problem when you try and handle this first, which is that you haven't finished last year yet. So we're going to be using best estimates for just now. So once you get into the tab itself, that first left-hand peach column is going to be transcriptions from your previous year, most recently submitted or saved application. So in the shown example here, that means in the previous year's application, they had all of these amounts in their budget. So you can't directly manipulate them in the application for the current year. You've got to open up the previous year's application and revise them there. So once you're going to fill out the expenditures as of 6/30, it's currently it's currently May, so you haven't actually gotten through 6/30, and you can't submit this after 6/30 without a penalty. So we're just going to use our best numbers for right now. This will be more pertinent and more important once we're in the final allocations in the fall, but for right now, it's going to be your best guess. Bear in mind that the only time that the GRA will directly reconcile to the amounts you're putting in this prior expenditures tab is if you have drawn down everything and then gone directly from the GRA to this. You've got no outstanding expenditures that haven't been drawn down yet. That's not common. That's not necessarily possible for a lot of folks. So generally speaking, this won't reconcile to the GRA much at all. Then once you've got what expenditures you believe are going to be out the door before the end of 6/30, you're going to enter in what your obligations are going to be for the summer. What are going to be your summer accruals for your teachers? What are your summer school fees? What are your summer school payroll going to look like? What's the end of the year going to look like? Because you've got that first 15 months to play with when it comes to carryover. So you're going to speak to those last 3 months. Once again, give it your best guess. The purpose here is to illustrate an early warning for you that you may not be on track to meet your carryover target. If you're entering in figures here and you see towards the bottom that there's a big red box that says, hey, you've got a carryover overage, this is your opportunity and timing to change your spending habits. If we get any carryover errors towards the end of the year in November, we're basically beyond the point where you can make adjustments. So it's going to be more ugly. So once you've got those sections filled out based on what you've actually spent or what you're planning to spend through those sections, whatever the budget amount is for the previous year, less any expenditures that you're planning to spend down before the end of 9/30 is going to leave you with your carryover amount in that green section. So in a scenario in which we are going to take our allocation, oh, that's not good. There we go. Okay. In a scenario in which our budget has the allocation for the current year and money we've transferred into the program without any carryover at all of the numbers on our prior expenditures tab are going to reconcile pretty cleanly. So the amount that's budgeted total is going to reconcile nice and easy. And then the basis for our carryover calculations are also going to calculate and be obvious. That box that's highlighted on the bottom right there is the basis for your carryover calculation. So that 119,000 is your carryover maximum. Now, in the event some of your allocation is carryover, that amount is not included in the basis for your carryover calculation the following year. So as I've shown here, that amount that 75,000 does contribute to the total amount budgeted, and it does contribute to the total amount you're responsible to spend in the current year. So you still get to that same $112,000 of carryover, but because our basis for carryover is only the allocation itself and not the carryover limit for the upcoming year is lower. That's the 108,000 below the second blue box. So even though all of our spending remains identical, that changes us from being in compliance to out of compliance for carryover limits. So when you're out of compliance for carryover, you're going to see that the excess carryover calculator is going to spit out a yes, and then you're going to get a bright red box at the bottom that shows you exactly how much you have to spend before you're at that carryover limit. If you're in a situation where you're pretty thoroughly planning on having a excess carryover, that's when you're going to be required to fill out a carryover request or an excess carryover request. So bear in mind, once again, LEAs only get a hold of an excess carryover request once every 3 years, with the occasional possibility of the federal level intervening and giving you an extra waiver. The power at the federal level is not super high for giving waivers at the moment, so I would defer to your 1 and 3 year timer. But once again, I would heavily recommend towards prioritizing spending on current year students as best you can. Stay on top of your current year funding. If plans have changed, you want to stay up to date and be able to pivot quickly so you're not caught with your pants down when the end of the year comes around. Now, when you're filling out your excess carryover requests, we're not asking for what you're planning to spend the money on. We're asking you to speak to what the circumstances were that led to the excess carryover showing up. This is the information we're going to use to fight for you at the federal level. So it's important you give us some good information, speak to the circumstances, what happened, when did it happen, that sort of thing. And then in there, we'll mark that, yep, you're good to go for the carryover waiver, or we're going to go ahead and decline the carryover waiver, and we've got to figure something else out. So once you finish the carryover calcs, whatever that number in that green bar will be, if you got your waiver approved, it'll appear in the carryover bar for your budget tab, as well as your allocation to set asides tab. And it'll contribute to the next year's allocation. Any questions there?
I think we just had the one about making sure you can obligate new spending through September 30th. So just that federal fiscal year reminder.
Cool. In that case, I'm going to mute and then give Maria remote control.
Thank you, everyone that's made it to this point of the session. I'll work pretty quick. I just want to cover a few points about your state EL or Title III programs. And then if you have any questions as you're working through your application, I'm happy to get on a Zoom call and we can work through this together if you'd like to. Let's see. Oh. So first off, if you don't have any EL students, you are still required to fill out a few things that you are assuring that you will be following state guidance in terms of the home language survey, screening and identifying students. And one section that we ask you to do is that you can let us know, even if you don't have a student, what your plans would be in order to provide services if for any reason a student is entering your LEA. Even if you do not have any students, you are able to join the Title III Consortium that provides training and supports and access to a regional English learner coach, even if you have 0 students. So we have some school districts that have joined the consortium for their EL coordinators or administrators or any teachers that want to be in the know and start developing some resources to support language learning in the case that they do have some EL students. So we do ask you to provide the assurance, and then you have the opportunity to let me know if you'd like to be a part of that Title III consortium for the upcoming school year. And I just want to go over a few important notes to avoid having your EL grant application sent back. One really simple way that you can work through it this year is, especially because a lot of us have been working together for many years to develop your LIEP. So I know with some districts we've been working on it 3 or 4 years, and we've updated and developed your CFSGA description and explanation. You can go and look at your 24-25 application, and if I've approved your LIEP, then that is a solid plan, and all you would need to do is update anything that may be changing. If you feel like your plan and your LIEP program looks basically the same from this school year that you will be doing next year, just make sure to just go ahead and copy paste and then update anything that may be changing. For those school districts that have Title III funds, we have 40 districts in Idaho. Those Title III budgets must be supplementing your EL program. So you should be using your general funds, state EL funds. You can also use Title I funds to provide the core language support. Then Title III funds should be used for family engagement activities and staff professional development. And just remember, Title III funds cannot be used for initial EL placement and any of the access testing. So if I see anything that is connected to access testing or identification screening, it will be sent back. So like I mentioned, the LIEP section will be the most important section that I review alongside with your budget. So it is going to describe your programs such as push-in programs, small group, co-teaching, who are the staff members that are providing services, and materials that you are using. So these are the examples that there are in the CFSGA. If you have something that doesn't fall along these categories, please reach out to me so we can talk through it and ensure that it's a research-based language instructional educational program. And you should be describing your LIEPs for elementary and secondary. So sometimes they're the same, but a lot of times they're different. So make sure you're taking some time to differentiate that. And I do just want to clarify that there is a difference between what you might write as an ESL coded course and then a content course with integrated support. So your ESL courses are going to be different than an ELA course. They must be taught by ESL or bilingual endorsed teacher, and you should be using a curriculum that's been scientifically researched and been proven effective. Your content course with integrated support is going to be in the general education classroom. So it'll be your grade level classrooms, your science, social studies, math classrooms, and there is language support being provided through the learning of content. And this can be provided through paraprofessionals or under a certified teacher, but our paraprofessionals should be supervised by a certified teacher. So some of the questions and something that will look really closely when you're describing your LIEP, excuse me, is to ensure that the paraprofessionals that are providing services are being supervised by a certified teacher and that they're also being provided lesson plans and professional development. One thing that we find in monitoring is paraprofessionals doing the work of a certified teacher, but not having the training that they need and the supervision. So we want to make sure that you are just go over your paraprofessional schedules and see who is providing those supports. I will also be asking things such as how is your curriculum, materials, and resources being used, and how are you annually evaluating your English learner program? That is something that we ask in the CFSGA that is also tied to federal program monitoring. I am moving just a little bit quickly, but when you have the slides, this is a little bit difficult to see on this screen. I did include a few examples for you to look at what a good LIEP description may look like. So if you look at this particular one, it's talking about the various models provided at the school. They also show the description between an elementary and secondary, as well as descriptions of a higher and lower proficiency level. And they also include what type of professional learning communities and professional development that they are providing their staff members. So this gives me a really good holistic view of a school district's LIEP. I also included an example of how to describe your materials and resources. You can use ELA curriculum as a component of your LIEP, but you also need to have EL specific curriculum that's teaching English language acquisition. And you can also provide different intervention and enrichment tools that are being used, as well as the professional development programs that are being provided to teachers. Just a reminder for any school districts that are using Title III funds, these are some of the acceptable uses of Title III. So you can pay certified staff if it's supplementary support, not core. So that would be if they are doing any kind of after school programming, summer school, if you have an above and beyond type of ELA program. Sometimes some schools may have a newcomer center that is going above and beyond. So that might be an opportunity. Any kind of tutoring, support staffs like paraprofessionals and graduation specialists. But the two areas that always need to be included in Title III are family engagement activities, so supporting a family engagement program, and EL related professional development. So most of the times when I send it back to you, the LEA, it's because it's missing one or the other from this area, the family engagement and professional development. And the last thing, I want to make sure you may see a validation issue. Just remember, if you have a validation issue, it's generally because your ELMS data has not been submitted in the English Learner Management System. So when you save your CFSGA component for the Title III EL program, if you see this validation issue, log into ELMS, click on the 2024-2025 EL data, and there's going to be two tabs that you need to complete, requiring questions about teacher certification, and then it's about 12 questions on EL activities at your school or your district. Then you click that certification button saying that to the best of your knowledge, this is true. Once you click that and you hit save, the save and submit button will appear. So please make sure that you click save and then you click save and submit again. If you click save, it's not going to show me that you have it submitted, and then you'll ask me, hey Maria, why haven't I did this information? And it's just like a weird thing in ELMS that you have to do that twice. Again, I went through this pretty quickly, but I am available if you'd like to go over your LIEP or review your budget or any other component before you submit your CFSGA. Okay, I'm going to pause and I will stay for questions if anyone would like to ask any more direct questions on their particular program. Thank you so much, everyone that came in, and thank you for supporting all of our EL students. I appreciate your work.
All right. We have done this for the first time in quite a while to put on a virtual event for you. And so one of the things that is important to us is to collect some feedback. If you wouldn't mind, before you kick off today, if you just drop in the chat a plus or a delta, you might have to name it that way. Say this is a plus or this is a delta. Plus would be, did we do something well for you today that helped you, that you would like to see us continue to do in the future? That's a plus. Delta is for change. And so if there's something that you wish we would have touched on that we didn't, or something that we did that you just went, that didn't really connect with me, put that as a delta for us. And so if you'd use the chat, if you don't mind, you are also welcome to email us separately and provide us that feedback also later. But if you don't mind, just give us some quick feedback about how this went for you, so we know what to continue to do in the future or change to support you better. So it's kind of your exit ticket to kick out today, is to drop that in the chat. And then I think we're getting near the end. Remind me what's next. Thank you. Thanks for coming. We appreciate you being here online. Hope this worked for you. And again, we'll stay on for you and probably end our recording here and answer any questions you might have. So don't forget your exit ticket, and thanks for coming.